rights you're entitled to. And yet, in the studies that we do polling our customers around the world, we find that an overwhelming majority believe that what privacy is in the physical world should be the same in the digital world. What is that new sense of privacy? What we think it is that people want to share more personal information, and we've heard several times at this event so far about how much information is available on Facebook. And yet we think not only do they want to share information, they want to decide who they share that information with, and most importantly, they want to determine how this information will be used. And this is an incredibly important concept in evolution of the concept of privacy. Secrecy, of course, is a form of this control, but it's not the sole form of this control. And therefore, we think that the concept of privacy must contain this element of control. We're seeing in the U.S. jurists up and down, but particularly in the Supreme Court, wrestle with this concept and starting to come to this conclusion. Justice Sotomayor, the newest Supreme Court justice in our Supreme Court, has effectively stated that the concept of secrecy must no longer be the predicate for privacy in our jurisprudence. Similarly, Chief Justice Roberts has recognized that with regard to things like the cell phone that you can bring out publicly, nobody has the expectation that notwithstanding the entirety of one's life and records can exist on this phone in your pockets, there is no intent to lose control of that privacy. So we're seeing an evolution of the concept of privacy that is very, very open to this idea of consumer control. We have a lot of things to balance when we talk about privacy, not the least of which is government's ability to protect its citizens. And yet we think if our prospects on this don't evolve, we will create more problems rather than solve more solutions. There are four basic things we hear from customers every day when we go out and talk to them about using these new technologies. When it comes to cloud services, the first most important thing is, what is my service provider doing with my data? The second thing is, who is requesting access to my data, and when is that access granted? The third thing I think is the most important that we need to grapple with here as professionals in this industry, and that is, how do we drive accountability for companies and governments to use data appropriately? And then finally, and maybe the hardest thing for us to do, is how do we address managing these concepts across a borderless internet in a world with borders? At Microsoft, we have invested heavily in privacy. Based on certain early work done by various jurisdictions, we've done hard work to invest in control and transparency of cross-border transfers in line with the EU model clauses. We've invested in published and audited security and privacy controls like ISO 27001. We also have focused on data-specific requirements for different types of data, like health information, particularly health information in the U.S. However, when it comes to government access to data, we think the law is less certain, and as a result, we have challenged our government in court so that we can understand the limits of law and give transparency to our customers on expectations of when the U.S. government should have and can have access to data. We have suggested ideas of how that might work, and we are very, very hopeful that we will win this case for the benefit of citizens around the world. And we're seeing changes in the U.S. government. While this is a very long quote, the gist of it from Senator Orrin Hatch, who recently proposed legislation that would change the notion of U.S. law that the U.S. can reach for data outside of its borders without consulting the nations where that data is held. And recognizing further that this conflict of law among all nations must be worked on if we're going to let this technology thrive. The number of countries with privacy laws has exploded. This is in large part due to the fabulous work that you're doing in each and every one of your jurisdictions. From 1970s, where we had 9 countries with privacy laws, to today with 140 different privacy laws around the world. This shows that privacy does matter, and it shows that our citizens around the world care about privacy. Thank you, sir. However, there are challenges with that, and that's why we're so excited about ISO 27018, a new born-in-the-cloud standard that we think can set the model for how we can balance these differing interests. The most important parts about ISO 27018 are this. It incorporates significant concepts about data privacy laws that we think nations around the world can buy into. It also puts severe consequences or ideas of how companies can use data, when they should use data, and most specifically, that if you're providing these cloud services, you must be clear when you're going to use the data for things like advertising purposes, and that you can't without customer consent. We think the ISO and standards in general can help in a number of ways. The first of which is it drives third-party validation that a company is actually doing what they're saying. We have these protections in our contracts, and we welcome the ISO process for them to analyze our processes to show that we're doing these things. The second thing it does is it gives you, as a data commissioner, privacy commissioner, the opportunity to know that a third party has vetted what we're doing. It's so difficult in this very resource-constrained world for you to evaluate every single service around the world, and the ISO process and the audit process gives that third-party validation. But most importantly, not only for cloud service providers that will operate around the world, but for multinational customers who actually need this certainty, they will now have the opportunity to comply across borders. We think this is so very crucial for the development of this technology. I'd like to close this discussion with the focus on trust. It is the cornerstone of this industry. We at Microsoft do not believe our products, our services, this industry, or our customers can thrive in this cloud-first, mobile-first world without trust as the basis. I'd like to borrow some words from Commissioner Reding, who said some companies and a few governments continue to see data protections as an obstacle rather than as a solution, privacy rights as a compliance cost and not as an asset. At Microsoft, we see privacy not as an obstacle but a solution, and we see it as an asset, not compliance costs. And we will continue to work so that we can continually evolve our technology while protecting the fundamental rights of ensuing generations to have their privacy. Thank you very much.
So I'm Adam Tanner, and I work at the Institute for Quantitative Social Science at Harvard. My work is about the personal face of business data, all the things we've been talking about, but on individual human scale. And I wanted to tell you a few of those stories from my recent book, which was just published last month, called What Stays in Vegas. My first story involves myself in East Germany in 1988. This was the last year of communism before the fall of the Berlin Wall. It was a fairly grim place. This is East Berlin. In 1988, people lining up to buy bread. Now, during a visit to Dresden that year, 10 people from the Stasi secret police followed me around and logged everything I did over the course of the day, and even took surreptitious photos of me. So here they've taken a photo of me just standing in front of a hotel taking notes. And for a single day in August 1988, they collected a 60-page file, and this is the overview of what that file looks like. This is the moment-by-moment log. So, for example, it says here that the observation has begun at 8 o'clock. Then at 8:53, it says, I've left the hotel in a PKW, which is an automobile, a Lada. So you can see that I was traveling in style at that time. It goes on to say, at 8:55, I've arrived at the Semper Opera. At 10:50, I've left and I've gone towards Kesseldorfer Strasse to the antique store, the Loewe antique store, and so on and so on. And if you go into the 60-page folder, it has many more details on a minute-by-minute basis. At one point, it'll say something like 11:07, he's looking at a map. 11:09, he's still looking at a map. 11:13, he's asking a passerby for directions, and so on. That's how detailed the Stasi file was. Now, that level of information, what the Stasi followed about me in historical retrospect, and what surprises me about it is how little they really understood about me. And you may say, well, what exactly was I doing to draw the interest of 10 Stasi agents in 1988? Well, here's what I was doing. I was writing a travel guidebook, the Frommer's Eastern Europe and Yugoslavia on $25 a day guide. But 80% of their work today is accomplished just by carrying around a cell phone. And in my research, I found that what the Stasi knew about me is small compared to what it knows about most consumers today. And that's the surprising thing to me. In my work, I've been motivated to tell the stories of the people who collect the data, to figure out why are they collecting the data, what is the motivation, who are they, and what are the impact on people. And one of the things that have surprised me is how vast this data collection is, how it's occupied at every different corner of the economy. And of all the different people I've come across, I'm now going to show you the picture of the person who is the most surprising data gatherer I have encountered. And very few people recognize this man. Let me see if there's a show of anyone in the audience, can they recognize this man who was once considered a god of sorts? Well, this is a data collector, and here's who he is. This is Jimmy Page, who's the lead guitarist of Led Zeppelin. Now, when I say he's a data collector, this is what I mean by it. This is his site, which is jimmypage.com. Just to use jimmypage.com, to enter into the site, not to buy anything, you have to enter in your name, first name, last name, your email address, and your exact date of birth. That's just so that you can then go into the site and use it. So you have to consider that if Jimmy Page is gathering this amount of information, there are few commercial people who are not. I wanted to also describe some of the things I've found in researching data brokers and some of the companies that gather information about people. Now, every year, and there is the annual meeting of the Direct Marketing Association, where data brokers gather and show off their latest wares. And a couple of years ago, I went to their convention in Las Vegas. And I was particularly surprised by a number of the lists that I found. Now, lists have the name, address of where you live, phone numbers, other specific details. Here's one list I came across. This is a list of baby boomers with erectile dysfunction. This is 1.7 million men, and it costs $85 per 1,000 names. Now, I went up to the counter and I spoke to the company gathering the list, and I said to them, "This is really great. Tell me how you've gathered this list." And they said, these men, they have volunteered this information. And so I was thinking about it, and I thought, you know, I don't see even one guy volunteering this information about himself. So let me propose this following to you, this company, and it was called T5 Healthy Living. May I buy a list of 1,000 names, and I will write them, and I will ask these men the following questions. A, have you received useful marketing information related to the condition that you've reported? And 2, did you know that you were on this list? And this company said to me, no, that would be an immoral use of our data. And unfortunately, this is sort of endemic of some of the data brokers or the people that gather data, is often they're quite secretive about who they are and how they operate. Another list I came across, well, about T5, that condition is just one of many conditions. It's hard to see in the small print, but if you want people with mental depression or people who suffer from epilepsy, you name your medical condition, you can buy it. And you may say, well, maybe this is not mainstream, maybe it's kind of out there with only few marketers using it. Well, if you look at their list of who their or some of their clients are, you have Citibank, Comcast, Procter & Gamble, eBay. Many mainstream companies are using the list. Another list I came across that was surprising to me was this list, which was high school students who are gay. So here's a list, 236,000 high school students who have gone to a site called scholarships.com. In their interest of getting a scholarship, they filled out sort of personal information about themselves, but they may not have realized that the real business that drives revenue for this company is the other business that sells these lists. And so there's your list of 236,000 gay high school students in the United States.